There was a show on PBS called This Old House, and the hosts have a segment on that show called What Is It? They show an old, some type of tool or odd gadget, and it's presented by one of the hosts, and the others are supposed to guess what it is and what it does. And so on one episode, Roger, the contractor, the landscape contractor, shows them a ceramic dome, and then has a plastic dome underneath that and a little moving propeller. And he says, what is it? What does it do? They try to be comedians. I'm glad they're not trying to be comedians most of the show, because mostly they're good at building and fixing old houses, not being comedians. But after they tell their little stories, then the person who asked it tells them what it's really for. And in that instance, it's just a device that you put in a bird bath to keep the water moving so the mosquitoes don't lay eggs and so the birds see the water moving and come to it. There's another time when they have a sliding red metal tool and they have their odd guesses and they learn what is it? It's for sharpening chainsaws, and that's what it does. Now, of course, they don't show the packaging and they don't show the directions because then they would all know what it is and what it's for and what it does. I got to thinking, what if they filmed an episode out on Nottingham Way here in Hamilton, and the host pointed to a great big building that happens to be white and a driveway on each side and a parking lot around it, and asked, what is it? Now, of course, if they were observant at all, they would know what it is, because out front it says the Presbyterian Church on the sign. But if somebody said, well, what does it do? Wonder what they would answer. Wonder if they would come up with some funny anecdotes about what the church does. People outside the church, sometimes I don't think they really know what the church does. They don't know what it is. And they have had no connections, and more in our communities do not know what the church is or what it does. And even as church members, sometimes I think we lose sight of what the church is about. Just before Jesus ascends to heaven, he gives his disciples instructions on what to do. It's not very complicated. Jesus says something like this: do what I have been doing. That's the essence of it. Do what I have been doing. Get out there and make disciples in the same way I made you my disciples. Live like me. Talk like me. Heal like me. Forgive like me. Teach like me. Act like me. Love like me. Be me to the world. That's what the church was to be doing. We call it discipleship. Now, it sounds a bit different than saying being a church member. Being a disciple, being a church member. They sound different, but one would think that being a disciple and being a church member would in fact be one and the same thing, which means that over the generations we have diluted discipleship into church membership, which is just being a part of an organization where you come to a few meetings and you pay a little bit of dues, and that's what you do with organizations. But discipleship is meant to have much more to do than just attending a few services and paying some dues. It's more organic. It has to do with our inner life, and it has to do with our day-to-day life, and in fact, our day-to-day life, so that discipleship has much more to do with what we do Monday through Saturday than it does with what we do on a Sunday morning. In Jesus' day, the rabbis had students. They were disciples. So Jesus wasn't the only one who had disciples. And a disciple then really didn't just try to learn what the rabbi said, took a few notes and said, okay, I got it, I know what the rabbi said. Rather, a disciple of the rabbi wanted to be like the rabbi, to be the rabbi, to endeavor to learn what the rabbi said and to be able to enact that in life. So that discipleship was not just learning what Jesus said, but rather to be and do what Jesus did. Dallas Willard, a spiritual writer, said, a disciple is what it would look like if Jesus were you. A disciple is what it would look like if Jesus were you. And then he goes on, as a disciple of Jesus, I'm learning from Jesus to live my life as he would live my life if he were I. I am not necessarily learning to do everything he did, but I am learning how to do everything I do in the manner that he did and all that he did. So we are to be disciples of Jesus Christ. Live like Jesus. Talk like Jesus. Heal like Jesus. Forgive like Jesus. Teach like Jesus. Act like Jesus. Love like Jesus. Be Jesus to the world. That's a high calling, a lot of responsibility. Be like Jesus. Be Jesus to the world. When you meet your friends and your family and your co-workers, they're going to be looking for Jesus in you. And then Jesus says, now, I want you to go and make disciples of other people so that they can be Jesus to the world. Now notice it says go, therefore. It says go. It doesn't say come to church. Jesus didn't say that. It says go. And the sense of going here is as you are going about your life, as we are interacting with our family and our friends and our work associates and our neighbors, as we go about being the church in the world, we're making disciples. So it's not just a special activity, it's a day-to-day activity. It's part of who we are, being Jesus to the world. It can also, that word go, have even a stronger connotation, as in the sense of move out. It's the general ordering his troops to move out, or it's the coach shouting, hey, let's go, let's go. Jesus says, get moving. So either of those senses, the sense of while you're out and about, or even the harder sense of, hey, get out there and do the job, either way, it has the sense of presence. Presence. We are to be present with people. Remember, we're seeking to be Jesus, to do all that Jesus did, to be who he was. We are to be present with people, to be with them, so as to know them, to love them, to assist them, to minister to them, because we cannot be the church from afar. Now, we have to be genuine about that. We can't pretend. Because our friends and neighbors and our work associates, they can spot a fake from a mile off. It has to be genuine. So it's not like, okay, I'm going to make a friend of that person so I can get them to come to church. That's not discipleship. The discipleship is to get to know that person because you want to get to know that person and you want to love that person and be with that person, just simply to be that, not for ulterior motives. And yet it's out of that presence that disciples can be made. We are to be disciples who are intentionally making disciples. Now, there's not an easy formula for that, although you can find some books that'll tell you these 4 things and these 8 things to do to make a disciple. I find it interesting that the best way to look at how to make disciples for Jesus Christ is to see what Jesus did. Just read the Gospels with an eye towards, well, what's he doing? How's he reaching out to these people? How are they being made to disciples? And you see, it varies according to who he is with and what he's doing at the time. Sometimes he's addressing people's worries and fears and talking about those. Other times he's kind of confronting them and questioning their values or their beliefs. One time he is seen defending a woman who's caught in adultery and doing so with great sensitivity and courage and warmth. And another time he's trying to help a wealthy person see that the possessions are ruining his life and that he needs to get rid of them. Jesus ministered to the physical needs of some and the spiritual needs of others. Sometimes Jesus just hung out with people. He just hung out with Zacchaeus. Hey, I'm coming, let's have lunch together at your house. He's sometimes with more of the leaders at the home of Simon. Somebody comes and anoints his feet with oil. He's just hanging out with people, talking with them, loving them, listening to them, ministering to them. Now, in the church, we offer things to promote discipleship. I spend a lot of my time trying to convince you to come and to be discipled. And so we have classes. Did you know that we have classes today at 10:15, and so on? And we have various activities and ministry opportunities. Those are all very important, and I spend a lot of time trying to get you to be a part of those. But notice in Jesus' disciple-making ministry, It doesn't always happen in the synagogue or the temple. Sometimes it does, but it's also where people live, where they work. He's out and about among the people. And that's where we live. And so we are to go in our day-to-day activities, and what are we to do? Well, we're to live like Jesus, talk like Jesus, heal like Jesus, forgive like Jesus, teach like Jesus, act like Jesus, love like Jesus. The church is to be Jesus to the world. Christians are to be Jesus in the world. Some people will never come to a church, and they're never going to know about Christ except for what they see in you and what they see in me. So I read about a pastor, Solomon Chang, a church planter. And you might immediately think, well, I'm not a church planter, I'm not going to do this. But notice how and he was most effective. He pastored in Taiwan, came to Canada, and then pastored in a church in Parsippany, New Jersey, of all places, and then moved to the Toronto area. And his churches were flourishing. But this is what was reported. He began reaching out with kindness and warmth to the new immigrants from mainland China who had no prior knowledge of the faith. His hospitality and generosity provided a radical kingdom alternative of Christian fellowship in an otherwise lonely, dreary routine of work. Now, that's to a specific audience, but I think there's probably a lot of people in Hamilton and the surrounding communities who kind of are in an otherwise lonely, dreary routine of work, and they need the hospitality and generosity of the church. And now here's the report. When asked the reason why the churches are growing, he simply responded that the church demonstrates Christian love, and that is the catalyst which draws people to Christ. You know, not all kind of fancy methods, and if you do it this way and that way, it's just simply the church demonstrates Christian love, and that is the catalyst which draws people to Christ. Now that love, Pastor Christie just gave witness to that within our congregation. We need to share that beyond the walls of the church and out into the community, because that love is a catalyst that draws people to Christ. Love is at the heart of making disciples. Dorothy Day, Christian journalist and social activist, she says, if we love each other, we will bear each other's faults and burdens. If we love enough, we are going to light the fire in the hearts of others. It is love that will make us want to do great things for each other. My prayer from day to day is that God will so enlarge my heart that I will see you all and live with you all in his love. Disciples of Jesus Christ are those who seek to live like Jesus and talk like Jesus and heal like Jesus and forgive like Jesus and teach like Jesus and act like Jesus and, most importantly, love like Jesus. So that all the things we do as a church, we need to make sure they are done in love and with a sense of compassion and humility. We are disciples, and we are intentionally making disciples. Now, I think that means two things. We need people who are mentoring us always in our discipleship. It's not as if we, quote, graduate and now we're going to make disciples that we don't need anything ourselves. We need to always be mentored in our own discipleship, and then we can have opportunity for helping others. So as we are being guided and guiding others, being taught and teaching others, being loved and loving others, it often can happen when we meet together. So a group of women in our church meet in the parlor on a Friday morning for study and discussion. They are both being discipled, and they're trying and hoping to disciple one another. A group of men on Monday evenings does the same thing. Pastor Doug mentors the youth leaders, and together they disciple our youth. I seek to meet with other clergy every Wednesday morning so that I can continue to be discipled, and I can hopefully help them in their discipleship, and so that we can then do our ministry in effective ways. So many examples about this are in the sense of community. Discipleship isn't just a solo enterprise. It's not as if I say, okay, Jesus said make disciples, and you're out there on your own. Say, okay, I'll try. But we do so in community. So there's a time to come together and to be nurtured ourselves so that then we are ready and able to then be discipling others. So we need to be on the receiving end so that we can be then on the giving side. Now, part of that then happens in community, but there are times when the one-to-one ministry is important, because you will meet people every week that they won't come to the church, or that we will not see, and so you have that opportunity one-to-one to be with people. As I was thinking about discipleship making, I'm very aware of the fact that somebody might notice there's not too many young adults here today. The one that I did notice is Sarah's here today, and because my eyes keep getting worse and she has her hair pulled back, I thought, oh, we have a visitor, look, a young adult. And it's Sarah, she's here every week. So and we often hear people lamenting, where are the young adults? Now, there are some young adults here this morning, and I have a word there in a moment. But rather than lament that, we need to say, how are we getting to know the young adults? How can you and can we interact so that we can get to know them and perhaps be a mentor to them in a way that they are able to receive that, to have these connections with young adults. The message to young adults is, who is mentoring you? What seasoned church members can you learn from and grow from in your own Christian life and Christian witness? And it's a lifelong thing. I've had a spiritual director for many years, and I'm now in between. I'll be looking for a new one, but always somebody mentoring me so that I can mentor others. And so it's not enough to simply say, well, where are all the young adults, or where are the kids, or where are the youth, but rather saying, what am I doing to mentor and to help disciple them? For them, you who are children or youth or young adults, to say, how can I be mentoring others, but also how can I receive that from others? Who is your mentor and encourager in discipleship? Who helps you grow as a disciple of Jesus Christ? Flip side, who are you mentoring and encouraging in discipleship? Who are you helping to grow as a disciple of Jesus Christ? Because Jesus said, go, make disciples, be disciples of Jesus Christ. Live, talk, heal, forgive, teach, act, and love like Jesus. Be Jesus to the world. But the world sounds so big, so be Jesus to the people at your workplace, the people who live next door to you, the people that you see at the grocery store, the people that you see in school. Be Jesus to them. In other words, be a disciple of Jesus Christ, making disciples. Why should we do that? Because that's what the church does. That's what the church does. Make disciples. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen.